romance writers, it is Jenna Harte with Write With Her, and today I have a short video on when to tell instead of show. Now, if you've been writing for any amount of time, you know the golden rule of writing is to show, don't tell. But there's also that old adage about rules are made to be broken, right? Well, sometimes. Showing is important because it brings emotion and depth to your writing. It is the thing that makes the reader become immersed into your story. But you don't need that level of detail for every scene in your book. I mean, who cares if the cereal snaps, crackles, and pops, unless, of course, that's crucial to the story. In most cases, breakfast isn't important, so simply stating that a character had breakfast is enough. If we know that showing generates a far more immersive experience for readers, but sometimes we need to tell, how do we know when we should be telling instead of showing? Well, here are a few tips to help you figure that out. Okay, the first tip is to use telling if the scene does nothing to further the story or reveal anything about the character. The breakfast scene is an example of this. Essentially, for unimportant actions, you can tell or gloss over them so that you can quickly get to the action, to all the good stuff of your story. So instead of going into details about breakfast, you can say something like, Sally woke up early, showered, dressed, ate breakfast, and then headed to work to meet her new boss. In this instance, Sally's morning routine really isn't that important. In this story, the good stuff happens when Sally meets her boss, so we want to get from her morning routine to the action of her meeting her new boss. Another reason to tell instead of show is to move from one scene to the next. In this case, telling is a way to transition from one scene to the next scene, especially if the location has changed or some time has passed. Here's an example. Joanne had a fitful night's sleep. In this case, the writer doesn't need to show Joanne tossing and turning all night long if the point is simply to let the reader know that Joanne didn't sleep well. Now, of course, if Joanne was prone to night terrors and that was an important factor in the story or knowing about Joanne's character, then perhaps you would show her sleeping. Here's an example. Joe drove 100 miles to confront Jane. Now we can use telling to have Joe drive the car to see Jane because the driving aspect really isn't as interesting as what's going to happen when Joe finally reaches Jane and confronts her. So in this case, the telling lets the writer get from where they are at the start of the scene and as quickly as possible to Jane so that the action can occur. Now, the next reason you might want to tell instead of show is to provide direction or a change of mood in the story. Now, this direction actually can get a little bit tricky because many writers actually will tell something and then follow it with showing when all they need is to show. Here's an example of what I mean. Pat was lost. She looked around, not recognizing any of the street names or buildings. In this example, the showing sentence, she looked around, not recognizing any of the street names or buildings, lets us know that she's lost. So you don't need to tell us the first sentence, Pat was lost. Now, with that said, sometimes telling can offer a direction or a cue to a shift of mood that helps the reader know where the story is going. Here is an example of that. Susie was having the best night of her life. High on life and love and liquor, she stumbled out of the bar. A strong hand gripped her arm, guiding her away from her car and into a dark alley. The odor of rotting garbage and urine made her gag. Fear finally broke through her blissful haze. In this example, we have telling of Susie's mood. She's having the time of her life, and right after, we're shown that her night has drastically changed. Another reason to tell instead of show is to summarize information. Now, action is really where the meat of the story is at, but sometimes you need to provide information such as backstory or setting. Now, the ideal situation is, if it's possible, to include these little bits of information or setting as part of your character's action, dialogue, or thoughts. And in fact, I have a video on some ideas on how to do this, particularly with setting, and I will include a link to that in the description below. So, if you have to jump out a story to drop information or set up a scene, short and succinct is the best. And in this case, telling can provide the information or setting quickly so that the story can resume. So here's an example. Joe's heart jackhammered in his chest and his legs burned as he ran from the car chasing him up the street. He'd always hated running ever since he came in last during the mile run in elementary school. Now, in the first part of the sentence, we're showing that Joe is running for his life. The latter part of the sentence tells the reader something about Joe's past. It's an interesting tidbit that we learn about him, but we don't need to learn about it by being shown Joe as a 10-year-old boy lining up with his classmates to run the mile, or what it felt like as they lapped him and then all went back to class while he was still finishing the last lap. So that's it. Those are several reasons in which you might want to tell instead of show in your book. Do you have other thoughts in which telling over showing would be the ideal situation? If so, I would love to know in the comments below. And if you have any questions about this video or feedback, I would love to hear that as well. If you would like to read a text version of this video, you can do so over at writewithheart.com, and I will have a link to it in the description below. I want to invite you to visit writewithheart.com, the free online community for romance authors. While you're there, you can create your own profile, access a growing library of tools and resources, set up your own blog, participate in groups. I have weekly tips and industry news. There's a weekly Zoom call for support and camaraderie and a whole lot more. And I think I already mentioned that it's free, so please stop by and check it out. Until next time, this is Jenna Harte with Write with Heart, wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.